Hello, everybody. It is 3 o'clock on the West Coast. It is 6 o'clock in New York. That means that it is time for our final class of taking your pitch to the next level. This is episode 7, class number 7, however you want to phrase it. We've been working like hell for the last 6 weeks, putting together all these different elements of a pitch. And today we're going to touch on all kinds of, little pieces that either are too small to address in one big topic, or that are just important to know when you are taking your pitch to the next level. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. My name is Carlo Gonzalez-Moss. If you've been following along, you know me already, but if you're new here, welcome. I'm the CEO of a company called Moranti Media. We are all about the pitch decks, pitch coaching. If you're pitching a TV show, that is our world. So I've been living in that world both as an executive and as a creator, and that's what inspired me to create my own company based around this niche area of our industry that is so vitally important. We don't get to do the stuff that we want to do if we're not good at pitching, right? We don't get to create shows. We don't get to get our shows on the air without being able to sell a show in a room via a pitch. So if you have any questions for me, or you're interested in working with Moranti Media, like I said, we do pitch decks, we do pitch coaching for pitchers and creators of all experience levels. You can reach out to me. I'm at Carlo Moss across all forms of social media. And you can also go to our website, moranti.com. That is where we have our price list for all of our services. And you can also reach out via the contact form on the website. Scroll all the way to the bottom, shoot me an email, and I will respond ASAP to that. So all that being said, like I said, this is our last class for this session. It's all been building to this. If you are watching live, go ahead and leave a comment, whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, anywhere else. As always, I like to say that this is a two-way street, a two-way conversation. If you have questions that pop up, especially in this episode where we're going to be tackling lots and lots of different topics, feel free to shoot a comment. I keep an eye on those all the time. So let's have a conversation about pitching. Now, all that being said, before we jump into this week, let's talk about last week when we were talking about that's actually our reviewing last week from last week. So last week was all about the pitching with partners, right? And we talked about all the different people that might be in the room on your team when you're pitching. For example, your writing partners, your producing partners, or the studio that you're working with, your reps, either your assistants or an assistant from the actual studio, as well as talent attachments. Some of the things we talked about for each of those different categories. When you have a producing partner or a studio rep in the room with you, understanding that they're usually just there to introduce you, and their main job in there is to sing your praises. That's what their intro is all about. So in order to help them do their job to the best of their ability, you as the creator, as the person who's doing the meat of all the heavy lifting in the pitch, you need to know what's special about you so that you can empower them with that kind of information to make you look as great as possible. And then on the other end of it, you also need to make sure that you know how to take the handoff when they finish their intro. They're going to set you up, and you want that movement to be as seamless and elegant as possible when they go from their intro to letting you jump into the pitch. We also talked about your reps being in the room with you. Your reps and exec partners are also going to be your eyes and your ears in a pitch when it comes to the other side of the table, especially on Zoom, so that when you're pitching, that's all you have to worry about. You don't have to sit there looking at those little tiny Zoom windows being like, did that person laugh at my joke? Don't worry. Your reps and your producing partners are going to be your eyes and ears in there, so you can focus on what you need to do to be successful in the pitch. We also mentioned that an assistant might be in the room either from your side or from the studio side, specifically so that if you can't pitch and run a PowerPoint by yourself, that's normal. Don't worry. They'll do that for you. It's a great, great tool to have at your disposal, to have somebody taking care of all your technology. So again, you can just focus on the pitch. We also talked a little bit about talent attachments. When you have, a name on board with you, a celebrity, and if you're working with an attached talent, keeping in mind that their time is going to be very limited in most cases. So as you build your pitch, you want to make it clear to them that you want them to be as involved as their schedule will allow. And then if you've had limited rehearsals, make sure that you're making it very clear with that talent attachment when you're passing the ball to them. Really set them up to look their best. And then the big one is pitching with writing partners. We talked a lot about a bunch of different elements with that, but some of the big things that we hit on were, number one, figure out what everyone's skills are and lean into them. Go, oh, you're good at this. You're good at this. Okay, you handle this part. You handle this part. We're all going to do the thing that we're great at. And by virtue of that, the pitch is going to be that much greater. We also talked about the format and flow of your pitch and compared like the two main types, which I labeled as ping pong or basketball, right? So when we're thinking about a ping pong pitch, that's kind of your, what you typically think of, where it's, one person talks, and then it goes to this, and then it goes to the next section, and then it goes to the next section, and then to the next, and on and on and on. But with basketball, you've got a point guard who's usually a more experienced pitcher, who's delivering the ball all over the place, who's going, okay, now it's going to be your turn to talk. Now it's going to be your turn to talk. And so understanding, all right, what's everybody in this pitch? What's their experience level? How do we make them look great? So figuring out what that format is going to be. And then finally, we talked about after the pitch with your writing partners, being really communicative. We talked about being open with them and letting there be a dialogue between them. We talked about how you really want to make sure that nobody's shouldering any blame if the pitch doesn't go. And then we also talked about the importance of rehearsal, as always with these classes. That's the thing that I hit more than anything else. And guess what? Spoiler alert, I'm going to be hitting that point again in this class. You guys know with me, it all comes down to rehearsal, rehearsal, rehearsal. So ultimately, I want you to be able to walk in there as prepared as possible. And so when you're working with partners, you really need to rehearse on your own, with each other, and then also with your partners from a studio or from a net, from whether it's your reps or whoever else is going to be in there. You want to get as much rehearsal in there as you can. So specifically, you can, in that moment, go, oh, I've been here before. I know what this is. We also talked about being prepared to raise the energy level if you need to, that if all of a sudden, for some reason, somebody comes in a little bit low energy, you're not getting dragged down by that. You're actually raising everybody up. And then after the pitch, not blaming anybody. If it doesn't go well or if it goes great, being a team, highlighting what your partners did well, and then they'll give that energy back to you. So, that is, in a nutshell, pitching with partners. And now it's time for our final class, everything else, or as I've called it, the sampler platter. So yeah. This name obviously comes from like when you go to a restaurant like a TGI Fridays or somewhere, and you order the sampler platter, right? You got some fries on there, some mozzarella sticks, maybe like some fried calamari, some onion rings, a little bit of everything, right? We're getting a taste of everything that's left over. And for me, pitching has so many different aspects to it, and not all of them fit neatly into one category or one topic. That is what today is for, all right? We're going to tackle the elements of pitching that you should know, but we're going to be more specific than other topics, or we might hit some topics that live in their own little world where they're not necessarily going to relate clearly to some of the broader topics that we've covered over the past 6 weeks. Like I said, this is also the best time for you to raise any questions that you might have, or honestly, for you to ask any questions that might be a little bit more focused on your specific situation. If you're watching this and you're like, I got kind of a more specific question about a project that I'm working on, I carved out a little bit of time for you all today, so go ahead and ask it. So number one, like I said, we're hitting a bunch of different topics. The first one is going to be speaking in sound bites. When we talk about speaking in sound bites, it's one of the most important skill sets that you can develop as a pitcher. And it's just as important as everything that we've talked about up to this. And honestly, it's gonna, when you're able to speak properly in sound bites, it's not only going to help you in your pitches, It's going to help you in every aspect of the entertainment industry. Being able to speak concisely and hit your point and get out, that is like gold. Because let's be real, a lot of us in this industry, myself included, we kind of like the sound of our own voice. And that can be a big, big hindrance when you're trying to get a big idea across. So, in talking about speaking in sound bites, think of this example. Like, you ever meet someone and you realize really quickly that no matter what question you ask them, it's going to lead to like a 3 minute long monologue. You may, in your head, you make that decision pretty quickly of like, yeah, I'm not going to try to ask too many questions here, and I'm going to go try to find anybody else to talk to at the first chance that I get. But now imagine that that person is also trying to sell you something. They're trying to sell you a show. It's going to be a pretty quick, hard pass, right? And the thing that I want you to realize, a lot of creators, we share a common need, and that is the need to be understood. I know for me, it's something that I discovered in recent years that being understood is literally my greatest want. And when I experience it not happening, it can be really, really frustrating and even traumatizing for me. And part of the reason why we got into this business is because we needed to find a way to take the thoughts in our head and articulate them in some way so that other people could see where we're coming from, what we're about, what we contribute to the world. And so we learned how to become storytellers, because it is through story that those complex thoughts and ideas that are kicking around in our head become understandable and digestible for others. And when our voice and our message is understood and affirmed, it's one of the best feelings imaginable. It's that feeling when your work really resonates with an audience, when someone catches the vision of what you're trying to get out there. If we're being honest, it's one of the things that we are all chasing, is being understood in that way. So we all carry this need to be understood, some of us more than others. And now we're in this picture, we're in this setting where we're presenting a project that we've worked on for months, hell, maybe even years. I mean, look, it may be literally your life's work. It's like, for me, when if I'm pitching Most Popular Girls to somebody, I'm literally presenting them with the last 10 years of my life. So we come into the pitch room believing in this thing like no other, right? We have the belief about this show. The work that we've put in is the evidence of our belief in it, right? You wouldn't put in all this work if you didn't believe in this show. You're walking into that room saying, this should be a TV show, and I'm going to tell you why. And if that person on the other end of the table can believe in it as much as we do, it literally results in a life-changing opportunity for us. How wild is that? Like, literally, millions of dollars are on the line in this meeting. And from our point of view, it all depends on if we're understood. If you get the vision that I have for this, there's no way you can say no. And so we do everything that we can to make sure that we're understood, often to our own detriment, right? We talk and we restate things and dig into the details and do everything that we can to make sure that you get me. Just to make sure. I really want to make sure that you're understanding the point that I'm giving you. I know that it's been very clear, but I just want to make sure. I want to make it very clear so that you understand, because I have a need to be understood. Just to make sure. If I can have that assurance that I am understood in this room, that you catch my vision in the same way that I do, then I can know 100% that my life is going to change, and that all my work is going to be worth it, and that all of my sacrifices are validated, and all my dreams, they get to come true right here in this room today. So I want to be sure. I want to be sure that I'm understood. But in an effort to be sure that we are understood, we shoot ourselves in the foot. We over-explain, we overcomplicate, and in fact, we make it more difficult to be understood. We run the risk of turning yeses into no's specifically because we needed to be understood. Because if you know your show, like you think you know your show, and like you claim to know your show, you should be able to convey the vision of it competently and concisely. So all that being said, What does it mean to speak in sound bites? I've been throwing that word around a lot. We've been talking about speaking in sound bites in a few different classes, but it's vitally important. So let's talk about exactly what it means. Number one, it means that you put periods on the end of your sentences. When you make a definitive statement, you let it land and you move on to the next one. You don't overcomplicate it with qualifiers, contingencies, or grandstanding. And when an exec asks you a simple question, you give them a simple answer. I can't tell you the number of times I've been in a room, either on the exec side as support for a creator or as a creator myself. When you see someone ask a simple question, you get a 3-minute long monologue that when the question got answered in the first 15 seconds of that speech. It's frustrating from an exec perspective because it feels like you're not really having a conversation. And when an exec asks you a complicated question, you still speak in sound bites. You answer it as clearly and concisely as possible. That is the best way for you to be understood ultimately, because true mastery of a subject is exemplified by someone who can lay it out in the clearest, simplest way possible. It goes back to the old Mark Twain saying, don't use a $5 word when a 50-cent word will do. Right? Remember way back when at the beginning of this class, we talked about that needing to be understood and that demonstration of competence. Please look at me and know that I'm smart. Fuck that. Don't focus on if that person thinks you're smart. Focus on your show and trust that you've done the work, that you will be understood. So how do we get better at speaking in sound bites? If this is such an important skill, how do we improve it? Number one, you edit and you rehearse. This is why I encourage my clients to write out the script for their pitches in some way. If it's detailed bullet points, fine, but really scripting themselves, because if you're able to hear it over and over again, you're much more likely to be able to pick up on the ideas that you're either restating or over explaining. You're able to look at a sentence and go, I can say that a little clearer. Let's cut down on this. Let's cut down this over here. This over here, we can truncate that. You know what? We made this point like 5 minutes ago. We don't need to restate it. It's already very clear. When you're rehearsing, if you're trying to get better at speaking in sound bites, it might help to record yourself. It sucks. It's like the most painful process ever to go through, rehearse a pitch, and then hit play on what you just recorded, because it's going to be the most cringe-inducing feeling ever, but it's going to help you immensely. And it's also the type of thing that nobody wants to do, so very few people do it. So if you go ahead and you record yourself, listen back, and take notes, guess what? You're already ahead of the game. Another thing that a tip that I would give you when you're editing, when you're going through your script, look for any places that might have compound or run-on sentences. Now, it's not like you can't have those in a pitch. I'm not saying like get rid of all of those, but those are usually a good indicator of a place where you might be over-explaining, where you're going this and this and this and this and this and then and this. Ask yourself if the point being made there can be stated more clearly or more succinctly, all right? And then look for any time where you're saying the same thing twice in two different ways. Is the pitch any different if you take one of those out? And always, always, always err on the side of brevity. Trust me, it will do wonders. What you should also do to help speak in sound bites is create those sample questions that you might get from the exec in the room, and then practice your answers. And then edit your answers, because that can feel comfortable giving a short answer, because ultimately, hold on, of course, now my computer decides to go out. Here we go. Anyway, practice those questions that you're going to get from an exec, and then take the answers that you create and edit them down until you've got this beautiful little soundbite that you can go, here you go. I know this like the back of my hand, because it demonstrates so much confidence in your project. It demonstrates a knowledge of what you're pitching, and it conveys to that person on the other end of the room, hey, if you work with me, I know what the hell I'm doing. So create those sample questions. I swear it's hilarious. My computer is just like, going in 800 different directions right now, and so our outline is getting hammered. But here we go. So in thinking about speaking on sound bites, finally, I want you to imagine the exec pitching the show to their boss, because their job is to synthesize the information that you're giving them and then convey it to someone else who's going to make the final decision on your show. And if you're speaking in sound bites that are easy to digest, remember, and share, you're making their job a hell of a lot easier. And you're ensuring that the vision you present here is the same vision that's being presented to that ultimate decision maker. There's a consistency in that messaging, and that is invaluable. And, you know, we can get a little bit, a little bit self-conscious when it comes to delivering short, confident answers, right? When we're talking to those execs and we know what we're talking about, we go, here's the show, here's this, everything in a soundbite. It can feel a little bit uncomfortable for us, partially because the idea of false modesty is so ingrained in us culturally, right? And so it almost feels overconfident and like something's wrong. But guess what? If I am handing you a bag with a couple $1 million or more, I want you to be fucking confident in the product that you're selling. And as an exec, trust that I am smart enough to understand the point that you're making, that I don't need it spoon-fed to me. And when you speak in confidence, when you speak in sound bites, you convey a confidence and an expertise in your subject that gets lost with over-explanation. And it's the difference many, many times between selling and not selling a show. I'm going to take a big old sip of water right now. And then we're going to move on to the next topic. Again, as we are going through these, we're going to hit a bunch of different topics. That was speaking in sound bites. Now we're moving on to some other forms of pitching. If you're watching this, you have a question, feel free to stop me, shoot me a comment, shoot me a question, two-way street, two-way conversation. But let's move on to other forms of pitching and how we talk about our projects, both formally and informally. So the first place where that comes up is the elevator pitch. That's a term we hear and use all the time in our industry, right? If you don't know what it is, we're talking about like a 1 to 2 minute big picture of your idea, literally like the length of time that an elevator ride might take. You should be able to distill down the important elements of your show and the pieces of it that are going to get someone else excited for it. You should be able to take that big pitch that you put together and go, all right, what are the essential things here? What's most important that someone's going to jump onto and be like, I want to hear more of that. Just to be clear, also, very rarely are you going to have a situation when like someone asks for a formal elevator pitch. There's not going to be a situation where it's like, yes, we'd like you to come in and give us an elevator pitch. It's just the type of thing that you want to be ready for. You know, if you're at a networking event, maybe you run into an exec or a producer that you know, and they ask you what you're working on. You want to be able to fire that off in the most digestible, clearest way possible. And then there's also something that really doesn't have a formal term, but I've dubbed it the quick pitch, where it's not necessarily a totally informal, like elevator type pitch, but it might be a situation where someone asks you for, say, a quick 5 to 10 minute pitch of this idea. Could be for any number of reasons. You know, it might be informal, might be a full-on meeting. Whatever it is, you want to be prepared with that. And so how do we prepare ourselves for a pitch that we don't even know what like the length is supposed to be ahead of time? The key to being successful in this type of environment is making your pitch modular and collapsible. This is why I preach knowing your pitch and knowing your project inside and out. And the way that we get to know our project like that is through lots of rehearsal. I bang the drum on that all the time. You should be able to identify, okay, this piece of the pitch is key. This part is essential. This thing over here, we're only going to need that in the longer version. So we're going to keep that over there. And for a pitch like this, you really want to hone in on the essential elements of your show. We're talking main story, the log line, the big thematic idea, the main characters, maybe the pilot, but just the absolute essentials. And the key skill in both of these types of pitches, it comes back to the first point from today, being able to speak in sound bites. Because in these settings, your time is very limited. So it's absolutely essential that you convey all of your ideas in the most efficient and most effective way possible. So those are other forms of pitching, and really how to talk about your show that you're working on in informal settings. Now I want to move on to the physical steps of building a pitch. How to actually build a pitch from scratch. I feel like this is something that we almost take for granted of like, yeah, and then you go and you make your pitch. You go and you build it from scratch. You might be watching this going, how the fuck do I do that? This is how the fuck you do that. So the way that I like to start, and honestly, when you've done this enough times, you start building your own process. So again, your mileage may vary compared to how I build mine. But I always start, you create a really basic skeleton outline with your main sections. We're talking intro, log line, series overview, characters, episodes, seasons, all that good stuff. And then you start filling those in. And you want it to be rough. Right now, you just need something to work with. You're just kind of like, you're a sculptor with a big old lump of clay, and you just need to turn it into something. And then from there, you start filling in your subheadings, like create a section for each character, right? So, all right, we made a really basic skeleton outline, and it just says characters. All right, well, now let's go in and let's fill in all of our little characters there. Identify your different sample episodes that you want to talk about, all that kind of stuff, right? Piece by piece, you're building it. And then from there, just start talking your pitch out. Honestly, that's most of the time how I build mine is I have those points in front of me and be like, all right, let's talk this out. Let's improv this a little bit and then write down what you're saying. See what works and go piece by piece. You start talking about your main character. What are his key traits? What are his qualities? With characters, we've hit it over and over. You want to focus on their personality and their relationships. Get away from backstory, get away from plot. So you go there, you start taking your pitch out and you're writing down what you're saying. You're talking, and you find the things that work and what doesn't work. And let it be really rough. Understand that. It is supposed to be very, very rough at this point. Do not give a shit if it is too long, if it's not funny. You just need to get something down on paper. That's what you're focused on right now. Like, I always give my partners a heads up that the first draft of my pitches is going to be super long. I think I've shared the story here, how I had one that clocked in at like around 40 minutes. And there was a lot of overwhelm on the other side. But I said, don't worry. This is my process. I write fat. I like to hear how things land. And eventually we worked that all the way down to, a solid 18-minute pitch. What you're doing at this stage is you're creating opportunities to get data and to get feedback. And once you have something down, then you can start running it and editing it. You're going to hear this thing a lot. So get used to it. When you're physically building that pitch, your focus at this point, you want something down on paper so you can start going, all right, this part sucks. We need to work on this. All right, let me dig into this piece. I would also suggest timing your rehearsals and running them all the way through. Then you go back and you make changes and you go piece by piece. But it helps give you a sense of the thing as a whole so that you're not just working in pieces all the time because, the pitch is this organic thing and each piece of it needs to work in harmony. And as always, get feedback from outside sources as much as humanly possible. And please, for the love of God, let it be bad. Trust that you will make it good eventually. It's okay if a month or two out, you're like, this thing sucks. This is awkward. I'm pitching a comedy and it's not funny. Let it be bad and get it out there because you're getting data and feedback. And with that data and feedback, you're going to be able to identify what's working, what's not working. Okay. So that is how to build a pitch from scratch. Now I want to talk about the materials that you're coming in with and how to present them. In my first class that we had last year, we discussed a lot of the differences between pitch decks, lookbooks, and in-room presentations. If you have questions like that, feel free to reach out to me, or also go back and watch that first round of classes. I believe it's still up on all the Catalyst sites, probably where you're watching this right now. But so we discussed the differences with all these terms. There's pitch decks, there's lookbooks, in-room presentations, leave behind, send aheads, all this kind of stuff. We'll dig into that a little bit today, but the way that I like to identify it is pitch deck is more word focused, lookbook is more image focused, in-room presentation, that's the keynote or the PowerPoint you have with you. That's going to be very image heavy because you don't want a bunch of words on the screen that nobody can read. My suggestion for the materials you should have when you're pitching a TV show are, number one, an in-room presentation that you're running during the pitch, presented in either keynote, PowerPoint, or slides. Then send along a separate pitch deck afterwards in PDF. That's what we commonly refer to as the leave behind. The difference is going to be that the in-room presentation is going to be very simple, very image focused, while the pitch deck is going to have way more words. The pitch deck is essentially a written version of everything that came out of your mouth in the pitch. It's like the easiest way to think about it. It's not exactly, if you think about it like that, it'll help you wrap your head around the difference between these two documents. And the big thing that you want to do with the in-room presentation is you're activating that exec's imagination by here's an image of what this character might look like. Here are some of the moods we're trying to conjure. So that's why, like, when I'm describing, when I'm going through my character section, you're going to see an image of the character, whether it's live action or animation. You're going to see an image of the character, big and bold, along with their name in big, colorful letters, something that's going to resonate in that exec's brain, because we're trying to hammer home all those important elements, give a sense of the show, but ultimately set it up so that when I'm talking episodes and when I'm referencing this character and this character by name, you're going to remember them because you've had those images and their names right next to them reinforced over and over again. You've seen it visually and you've heard it from my mouth. So you're going to remember that and not get lost, because that can be the kiss of death. If you go through and you're explaining all these episodes and the exec listening has no idea who you're talking about, it's going to be pretty tough to follow. And the way to think about the keynote or the in-room presentation, it is designed for the people who are watching the pitch in the room, whereas the pitch deck is for the people who weren't there. And I get this question a lot. So here are my tech recommendations, my personal preferences. Again, personal preferences, your mileage may vary, but when it comes to pitch decks, in-rooms, all that good stuff, here are my personal recommendations for an in-room presentation. I prefer Keynote. I'm used to working with Macs, and as a graphic designer, I prefer the shadows and animations in Keynote the best. I'm getting a package from my front door. I'm going to go ahead and answer this and let them in. That was awkward. But when we're thinking about tech recommendations, Keynote is my preferred thing. If you're more comfortable with PowerPoint, if you're more comfortable with Google Slides, by all means, go right ahead. But as a graphic designer, I really like the shadows in Keynote. They feel the most realistic of any of those programs. And the animations are just a little smoother. So that's why I prefer Keynote. But like I said, your mileage may vary. I also prefer to use a desktop platform as opposed to a web-based platform like Slides, so that I have a hard copy on my computer. And God forbid, if shit happens with the internet, I'm not beholden to that. So for my pitch decks, I like to build the deck in Adobe InDesign, and then I export that to a super high-res PDF. For reference, when I'm exporting to a PDF, it's usually somewhere between like 60 to 200 megabytes. So it's really big so that all those images can pop as much as possible. For pitch decks and in-rooms, I also use Adobe Photoshop a lot. So if you're going to be building these types of projects, I would highly recommend investing in an Adobe Creative Cloud subscription, because that's going to give you access to Photoshop, InDesign, Acrobat, which is their PDF reader, which is great, and a slew of other products that are going to be hugely helpful to you. I also know that plenty of folks, especially who aren't like carrying a graphic design background, they use Canva and they swear by it. People love Canva. I'm not that familiar with it. It's easier to pick up for someone who doesn't have a graphic design background. But like I said, I don't use it with any sort of regularity, so I really can't recommend it one way or the other. But, that's out there too. One thing that you should definitely make sure you're doing, everything, your in-room, your pitch deck, if you have a lookbook, anything that you're sending should be a 16 by 9. Unless it's like a pure Word document. It should be 16 by 9 because that is the size of every computer screen and every TV screen. Nobody's going to be printing anything out anymore. So make sure that that fills the entire screen. And, one thing that is like one of my pet peeves that I see all the time, you get people who will send you a pitch deck or something that's not 16 by 9 for whatever reason. And as the person reading it, you have to scroll little bits. And you're like, oh, it only takes up like 3/4 of the page. You have to scroll to get to the bottom of the words, and then it jumps to the next page. It's a pain in the ass. Make life easy on everybody. 16 by 9. Just make it your standard for any types of visual presentations that you're putting together. One other quick pro tip: when you're building your materials, if you need stock photos, graphics, icons, or illustrations, here's my go-to. Here's my secret weapon. freepik.com and flaticon.com. They are owned by the same company. You can get a subscription to both or to one. They're just two different products, but it's, each of them is like 10 to 11 bucks per month. They're super easy to use. I've been swearing by them for years. It is fantastic. And everyone that I turn on to them, they literally I get no kickback from recommending them, but anybody that I've said go use FreePik, that is all they ever use. So try out FreePik. Huge recommendation for stock photos, graphics, icons, illustrations, everything that you need in that department. Woo! We are burning through this class. Next, we're going to talk about scheduling and the tour of networks, which sounds like super fancy, right? So here we go. In most cases, your rep or the studio is going to have a really clear strategy of which networks they want to approach and how they're going to set up your pitches. They'll probably even have a strategy of like, we want to go to this place first, we want to go to this place second. Yeah, all that kind of stuff. Don't try to do that reach out on your own. Reps and execs spend a lot of time building up relationships at the networks, and they know how to set things up the best. This is what they do for a living. This is literally what you are paying your 10% of your what your option agreement is for. Like, this is what all that stuff is for. Let these people do what they're great at. So the way this works, first they'll reach out via email, maybe a phone call, and they'll soft pitch your project. Usually it's just a log line, a little info on you, maybe even if you put together a video teaser or a sizzle, they'll send that along. But all they're trying to do is set up a meeting. So they're going to try to get that meeting set with a minimal amount of information. You're the one that's going to sell the show in the room. They're not trying to sell the show based off of this email. When I was an exec with the Russos, this was one of my jobs. Every time that we'd have a new show, reach out to my connects at the networks, try to get pitch meetings set. And then they would say, can we see a pitch deck? Can we see, what's the log line? All that kind of stuff. And so it's this little back and forth of getting a meeting set. So then a good rep or partner is going to loop you into the conversation about who they want to go out to. They will also ask for your input. Feel free to float ideas, but always understand that they're going to have a better sense of the marketplace than you will. So don't push too hard thinking that you know better than everybody else. If, let's say you've got a TV MA animated comedy, don't be surprised that they're not going to reach out to ABC. Also, let them know if you have existing relationships with execs at different networks, as well as who you've pitched before, and if there's any place where the execs really love you. Remember with my last pitch, the studio gave me a list of all the places that they wanted to go out to, along with the execs that they wanted to reach out to from those networks. And I had 2 writing partners on this project. So what I did was I took that list that they sent. I was like, great. I made an entire spreadsheet for the studio. And in that spreadsheet, I wrote down exactly what experience each of us had pitching those particular execs and if they had particular feelings about us. I would say, oh, this network fucking loves me. I've pitched this person a ton of times. Let's make sure that we go out to them. And once your team makes their initial contact, you'll start getting lots of emails from assistants asking for your avails. They will say, okay, Amazon came back to us with the following times. Which of these can you do? I cannot emphasize this enough. Respond to those emails as quickly as possible. Literally make them a priority to respond to them, because these network availability windows close quickly, and making life easier on that assistant is vital. Those windows of availability close very fast because guess what? There's lots of other people trying to pitch that network. So when they say, hey, we can do this time or this time, let them know if that time works for you. Make life easier on that assistant and be on top of it. Check your calendar and then respond with all of the times that you're available. The more openings that you have, the better, because they're trying to coordinate the schedules of literally everyone that's going to be on that pitch. And speaking from experience, as an exec, there are a few things more frustrating than having a pitch get delayed for a month because we had to chase down a creator for their avails just because they didn't respond to an email. Like, that is a killer when you go, oh, great, we can go and pitch this network in 2 weeks. You send an email out to your creator, and then they take a week to get back to you, and in that time, the pitch gets delayed a month and a half. That sucks. Now, that being said, know that delays are going to happen. Execs have to reschedule pitches all the time for any number of reasons. Please do not read anything into it. Just assume that someone's kid got sick or someone went on vacation or something. It's part of the business. Don't let it get you down or get you frustrated. Like, don't sit there assuming, oh God, clearly they don't give a shit about us. They keep rescheduling this meeting. You don't know what happens. Shit happens, okay? It's out of your control. Just be ready for your pitch when the time comes. It goes back to that lesson that we talked about a few weeks ago. Focus on what you can control. Ignore everything else. And then as soon as you get confirmation on a pitch date, put that shit in your calendar. These meetings usually get set for anywhere between like a week ahead of time to 2 months ahead of time. And usually it's closer to 2 months than it is to a week. And if you got a bunch of back-to-back pitches and you haven't written it down, you will forget. And it is a bad look to miss a pitch meeting. Idiot-proof that shit and get it in your calendar right away. And on top of that, we're pitching a lot on Zoom still, right? Almost all of our pitches are still on Zoom. As soon as you get a Zoom link or a Google Meet link, whatever the video conference link is that you get, add it to the calendar event. Make sure that it is easy for you to access, because nothing is worse than when you realize right before you're supposed to log on for a pitch that you now need to go digging through your emails to find the link for the meeting. And, oh, can I remember what the name of that assistant was who sent me that originally? Or what's the keyword that I should look up? All that kind of stuff sucks right before you're about to go have a huge pitch, right? So get it taken care of ahead of time and be ready. The last point that I want to make about touring networks and everything is understanding the strategy that goes into pitching different networks. And that a lot of times the most common strategy that you'll see, especially from good execs, is they'll set up some meetings at places that might seem like real reaches that don't necessarily fit your show that great. Oftentimes those will be put at the front because they want you to get a couple under your feet. Almost always, like, whenever I'm doing a tour of networks for a pitch, we'll end up by the end of it going like, oh man, if we could just now I want to go back and pitch all of them, because you learn so much, right? So a good exec is going to set up a pitch at somewhere where they're probably not going to buy it, but they want you to get that experience of doing this pitch for somebody with real stakes under your feet so that you can kind of get into your groove. There's a rhythm to it. And when you hit that point where you've got 3 pitches set in a week, and you start getting into that rhythm, you can feel it. You can really feel when you're in your groove. And so a good exec will do that by design and set you up with a place where if you make a mistake, if the pitch doesn't go so well, the stakes aren't that high anyway. They probably weren't going to buy it. So we wanted to get our yayas out and really get ourselves ready for the places that we think are going to be the best fit. So that's usually going to happen a lot. So if you get a pitch set at some place where you're like, I don't necessarily want to sell the show here, or I don't think that we're going to sell it here, go ahead and take the meeting anyway and just use it as practice. Use it as rehearsal. The more bites at the apple, the more swings at the ball, whatever metaphor you prefer that you can get, the better for your pitch. Another thing that I want to hit on, especially as we're coming towards the end of our time today, is how to take a pitch. As you grow in your career, you're going to find yourself being pitched to just as much as you are giving a pitch. I can speak from experience here. When I first started my career, at my first pitch, I had never been pitched to before. And then as I started selling things and I started a production company and then became an executive, all of a sudden I'm getting pitched to a lot more than I'm doing the pitching. You could be getting pitched to for any number of reasons. Maybe you end up getting hired somewhere as an exec. Maybe you start your own production company and you're bringing in other things for you to work on as a producer. Maybe, who knows, You even start your own pitch company and literally end up listening to pitches for a living. That's me. But regardless, a good skill set to develop is being able to take a pitch, because just like giving a pitch, it is a skill set unto itself. I also want to throw this out as people are joining throughout. If you have questions, if you have comments, anything around the world of pitching, we've got about 15 minutes left on this call. Doesn't necessarily need to be related to one of the topics that we hit here, but this is the last call for questions, comments, anything that you want to talk about. Leave a comment in that little Facebook box or that YouTube box while you're watching this, and we will do our best to tackle it in these last 15 minutes. Anyway, back to taking a pitch. So one of my number one things, take notes. If you're sitting there and someone is pitching you, it will help you. It will help keep you engaged, and will also help you remember the important things that you want to say after the pitch. Make little notes of, like, if a particular thing lands really well with you, if you have a question pop up, don't think that you're going to remember it. And on top of that, it conveys to the person on the other end of the line that you are actively listening, right? If I'm pitching someone and they're sitting there and they're taking notes and I can see that they're engaged, that makes me feel better. That's all, that goes back to be a good person. Also, if you're taking a pitch, ask questions afterwards. Even if you know you're not going to move forward on this, don't just dismiss this person offhand. Honestly, pitching is like such a nerve-wracking experience. And at the very least, you can validate this person's effort by asking some thoughtful questions. It's such an awkward and deflating moment when you finish a pitch. You ask if anybody has questions, and they're like, nope, we're good. And that might be a good sign. It might be a bad sign. As I've gotten better at pitching, I find oftentimes that people don't have questions because I hit on everything, and any questions that they had got answered through the course of the pitch. But if you're taking a pitch, do your best to ask some questions. For me, when I'm taking a pitch, I always aim to ask questions that are going to help make the pitch better or raise something that the creator maybe hasn't thought about. If I know that I'm not going to be moving forward on that, at least I can do no harm, right? At least I can go, well, let me ask you this question. This will maybe get your brain thinking about something that's coming up short in the pitch that'll help, get the pitch to a place where it might be sellable. And with that in mind, develop a list of go-to questions that you have at your disposal. That way, worst case scenario, you're sitting there, you can't think of anything. Maybe it's not even that interesting of a pitch, but you've got your go-tos to fall back on. And when you create that list of go-tos, it might just be sitting in your head of like, these are the questions I usually ask, or you might even have a document with your list of go-to questions. But what it ends up doing as kind of a side effect is it helps you create a checklist of things that are important for you to see in a pitch if you're going to move forward on. Like for me, when I was an animation exec, one of the questions that I would always look for to see if it was answered in the pitch, and if it wasn't, would be my first question is, why does this need to be animated? Because a lot of times I would have people come in and pitch me a show and they would be trying to sell me animation just because animation was hot or because they thought it'd be a cool idea to make an animated show. And the best version of the show was actually live action. And the only things that I would move forward on would be things that were best animated and that had a compelling reason why they needed to be animated. And so that was always one of my go-tos. And so develop a list of go-to questions that you have that essentially serve as a checklist of like, if I'm not seeing this, then something's wrong with the pitch. On top of that, create a welcoming environment. This is a nerve-wracking experience for the person on the other end of the table. There's no reason to make it any worse. Honestly, be the social glue that helps put everyone at ease. Be that person. Take on that responsibility. You're the person in the room that they're pitching to. Be the person in the room to make everybody else feel more comfortable. Before the call, ask some small talk questions. Get to know the person a little bit. I always say it costs you nothing extra to be nice. And on that note, when you're listening, be engaged. Give this person your undivided attention. Don't be texting. Don't be doing whatever, don't be distracted by whatever's on Twitter. Respect the time that they put into preparing this and the vulnerable place that they willingly put themselves in. Do not give off the vibe that you're somehow more important than they are. They already feel insecure and nervous enough. The last thing that you need to do is to validate their own imposter syndrome just so that you can feel important. If you like, fuck that noise. Like, be a good person, be engaged, listen to what they're saying. You took the meeting, at least give them that time. So that is how to take a pitch. I have a few final points as we're in our last 10 minutes of this class. I'm going to hit those, but first I want to go over everything that we talked about today really quick, just because we're not going to have a chance to review next week because there's no class next week. And we went over a bunch of different things. So first thing that we talked about today was speaking in sound bites. We digged into a lot of the psychology about why it's hard for us to speak in sound bites. Ultimately, it boils down to our need to be understood. We feel this need to be understood to make sure that you're getting what I'm saying, right? And it can result in us shooting ourselves in the foot because we over-explain and overcomplicate everything that we're talking about. Then we dug into some nuts and bolts about what does it mean to speak in sound bites. It means you put periods on the ends of your sentences. It means when you make a definitive statement, you let it land and you move on to the next one. When an exec asks you a simple question, you give them a simple answer. And when they ask a complicated question, you answer it as clearly and concisely as possible. Because ultimately, we talked about the fact that if you really know this show inside and out, you can explain it as simply as possible. There's this great kind of idea that's present in law, it's present in science, but that you don't really know a subject until you can explain it to a child, until you can explain it simply. And the same thing goes for our pitches, right? If you can explain it as clearly as possible, as simply, concisely as possible, that's the person that knows their show inside and out. And then we dug into how you get better at speaking in sound bites. You edit and you rehearse. You go over it over and over and over again. And when you're rehearsing, you might even record yourself, even though it's real painful to do. And when you're editing, one of the things that you look for is compound or run-on sentences. Those are often indicators that you're over-explaining. And you look for any time when you're saying the same thing twice in two different ways. And then if you take one of those out, does it make the pitch any different? Always err on the side of brevity. And then create sample questions that you might get from the exec in the room and practice your answers. Practice those confident, concise answers, because when the nerves are up, it's a hell of a lot harder to just say your point and get out. And then finally, imagine the exec pitching the show to their boss. Give them the soundbite that they can repeat verbatim, that they can remember. If you can keep it concise, they can remember it. And they can then synthesize that information and give your exact vision to their boss. When you speak in sound bites, you convey a confidence in your subject that gets lost with over-explanation. That's how you sell TV shows. And then we talked about our other forms of pitching and how you can talk informally about your projects. Talked about the elevator pitch, just 1 to 2 minute big picture idea. Focus on the most important elements. What's the thing that's going to get that person excited? And then the quick pitch. Right? It's not really a term for it, but yeah, 5 to 10 minutes. Could be any number of reasons why you're getting this. But the key to being successful there is making your pitch modular and collapsible. And we also talked about what goes into building a pitch from scratch. You should be able to sit down, start creating a basic outline. Then from that basic outline, you start filling in your subheadings. Under characters, you list out your characters and you start filling those in. And you start talking out your pitch, getting it on its feet as quick as possible. You're basically just taking this lump of clay and being like, all right, let's just start stretching this around, making it into something. Making sure that you're letting it be really rough, that you're not sitting there over-judging and over-editing yourself, right? Not worrying like, oh, it's too long. Oh, it's not funny. Oh, it's this. Guess what? Your pitch at the beginning is going to suck, and it should suck. I use the example. A lot of times, my 20-minute pitches start out as 40-minute pitches. And then once you have things down on paper, you can start running it and editing it. I mean, it goes back to that old principle that we've all heard as writers of, writing's basically just editing. So get the thing down on paper. And then so you can get used to it, because you're going to be running it all the friggin' time, and get feedback from outside sources as much as possible. Let it be bad and get notes. Be a detective looking for places where you can get notes. And then we touched on the materials that you're coming in with, speaking specifically about pitch decks and in-room presentations. My suggestion to you, have an in-room presentation that you're running on Keynote, PowerPoint, or slides, then send along separate pitch deck afterwards in PDF. Difference between the two, Image focused is the key word for your in-room presentation. Word focused is the key word for your pitch deck. I gave you some of my tech recommendations. If you remember, I prefer Keynote. I build all my decks and everything in Adobe InDesign. And then we talked about the scheduling of your pitches and the tour of networks. Really leaning on the people on your team to do what they're great at, empowering them in the best way possible, understanding they're going to have a strategy. You give your input, make sure that you're equipping them with all the information that they need, but let them take it and run with it. And as soon as somebody calls you, it sends you an email and says, yeah, what's your avail? You respond to that email immediately and get rolling with that, so that you're not missing out on potential opportunities and letting pitches get delayed for months and months at a time because you were too lazy to respond to an email. And then also just knowing that delays are going to happen. There are networks where I know they will never, ever hold the first meeting that we set. They're always going to reschedule for like a month afterwards. And so not letting that rock me. Understanding that totally out of my control. I'm focused on what I can control. And then like the actual nitty gritty of once you get a confirmation on a pitch date, you put that in your calendar, you put the Zoom link in there as soon as you get it, you set yourself up for success in that way. And then finally, we looked into the future when you're going to be taking pitches as a successful producer or possibly an exec, and what you should be doing. You should be taking notes, you should be asking questions, and you should be creating a welcoming environment. You should be active and engaged and creating a situation where that person can succeed, because ultimately that's what you want. You want them to walk in with the next huge thing, and you want them to sell it to you, because that's going to create a situation where you can grow in your career as well. So let them succeed. Don't be a dick. So all of that being said, that now brings me to my final points. I have 4 things that I want you to remember. If you forget everything that you have heard in this class, walk away with these 4 points and it'll have been worth it to you. Number 1, do everything that you can to walk into your pitch as confidently as possible. Pitching is one of the most nerve-wracking things that you're going to have to do in your career. It is high stakes, high pressure, and you need to walk in there with the confidence of, yeah, I know 100 people are walking in here. I'm the one that's walking out of here with a TV show. So everything that you do, you need to be able to walk in there with the confidence of somebody who is going to sell a television show. Your idea is so great that you're going to walk in there and that person on the other end is going to put their job on the line for your idea. They are going to willingly give you millions of dollars to take your idea from your head and put it onto TV. That's huge. And that requires a huge amount of confidence. So do everything that you can to walk into your pitch as confident as possible. Number 2 is not a surprise. Rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. Rehearse as much as possible. If you're telling yourself that you don't want to be over-rehearsed, it doesn't really happen. Find different ways that you can, jazz up your rehearsal process if you're sick of the thing. I always say, rehearse until you're sick of it, then keep rehearsing until you're not sick of it again. And you will find different things about this pitch that you will be able to make it the best thing possible. The rehearsal process is so key, and it is so clear when a creator has not rehearsed their pitch enough. And if you're questioning yourself about do I really need to rehearse that much? Your competition is rehearsing that much. And ultimately, that's what it boils down to, is the person that the exec is deciding between you and somebody else. Don't be the one that rehearsed less or put less work into it. All right. 3rd point I want to make is the point that we started with today. Speak in sound bites. Make your points clear and concise. It gives off so much confidence, and it gives off an air of mastery about the topic that you're talking about. When you can speak clearly and concisely, hit those sound bites, and then that exec is going to remember exactly what you want them to remember. You're going to pass it on to their boss, and then they're going to buy your show. And finally, we hit on this point all throughout this course. Focus on what you can control. Throw away everything else. Focus on the things that you are in control of. You're in control of how you present this thing. You're in control of what you write. You're in control of your performance, and you're in control of how you react to good or bad news. Those are the things you can control. Whether they buy the show or not, you actually are not in control of. That's their decision to make. And there are a lot of things that you can't do to affect that decision. So identify the things that are within your grasp and let everything else fall by the wayside. So all of that being said, that has been 7 weeks of taking your pitch to the next level. Again, my name is Carlo Gonzalez-MOSS. If you have any questions for me, feel free to reach out to me on social media at Carlo Moss. If you're interested in working with my company, if you've got a pitch coming up and you want coaching, reach out to us at Moranti.com. That's the name of the company, Moranti Media. We do pitch coaching. We build pitch decks. We build in-room presentations. We do it all when it comes to the pitch. So feel free to reach out to us. And if you are going to the Catalyst Festival in September and October of this year, I will be there. I will be looking forward to meeting you. Feel free to come up. Feel free to talk to me. It is one of my favorite times of the year. I'll be like, I'm 2 months away from having a baby. So I'll be real excited. I'll be wearing a big smile on my face. Until then, thank you all so much for joining me. If you have questions, if you have comments, feel free to reach out to me online. It has been an absolute pleasure getting to share all this information with you. I hope that you've been able to take this information, that you can stand on my shoulders, and I'm looking forward to when you all reach out to me and tell me, I took your class and now I sold a TV show. So yeah, I know. Thanks. Thanks again for the time. It has been wonderful. Y'all stay safe out there. Be well. Thanks. Bye.